Aloha, my name is Lee Ngo. Welcome to the 40th Annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Halekulani and our discussion with Yi Chen, Director of First Vote. We would like to extend our thanks to the Vilcek Foundation and all our sponsors for supporting this film and our film festival. Our presentation of First Vote is part of the New Americans Perspective program at HIFF, which is supported by the Vilcek Foundation. Liz Boylan from the Vilcek Foundation is here to share some more information about the foundation and the program itself. Liz, throwing it to you.
Great. Thanks, Lee. I'm really excited to discuss and share the New American Perspectives program this year as part of HIFF40. The Vilcek Foundation was established in 2000 by Jan and Marisa Vilcek, immigrants from former Czechoslovakia, to honor and celebrate the many contributions immigrants make to arts, culture, society in the United States. We're delighted to share First Vote as part of the New American Perspectives program this year, and are grateful to the entire HIF team for connecting us with the film and with Yi Chen, the film's director. Since 2007, the Foundation has worked with HIF to present a program that highlights and shares the work of immigrant filmmakers, artists, and creators with the festival's audiences. It's really special for us to be able to share a program like New American Perspectives in Hawaii, a place that has been so profoundly shaped by human migration and immigration. And when we are all so aware of the importance of democracy and voting rights in the US, being able to share a First Vote as part of the program this year is a really special honor. So tossing it back to you, Lee.
All right. Thank you so much, Liz. Some quick housekeeping bits for everyone that's watching right now. For up-to-date information on additions to our program and the full schedule of film events, HIF Talk Story sessions, and Q&As, please visit our website at www.hif.org. To participate in our Hawaii News Now Audience Award voting, please head to hawaiinewsnow.com/HIF to cast your vote for the favorite narrative, documentary, and short film. Mahalo to Hawaii News Now for their support. So let's begin with our Q&A with Yi Chen. Yi, are you ready to start?
Yes. Hi, Lee. Thanks
Hello.
for having me.
Absolutely. Very honored to have you here. Let's talk about your film. So First Vote looks under the hood in a way that counters many prevailing assumptions towards the Asian American political community. What were your initial intentions and questions while making this film? And while making it, how did they evolve?
Yeah, so I was initially interested in first-time voters in my own community from both sides in battleground states. And initially, I was interested in asking them, why did you vote for Trump? Why did you vote for Hillary? I started the project after the 2016 election. So that was how I initially wanted to approach the film. And I guess another meaning behind the title First Vote is because I also came to the U.S. in 2003, and I became a citizen last year, and 2020 is my first time voting. So as a first time voter myself, I was interested in telling stories about Asian American voters' growing participation in the democratic process. But the film really has evolved from just first time voters to including characters like Jennifer. It wasn't her first time voting, but it was her first time being actively participating in election. It was her first time door knocking for a candidate in 2016. And the other way the film has evolved is initially I was following three characters. I was following Lance, Sue, and Kaiser in 2017, but I met Jennifer in the beginning of 2018. So she became the fourth character, and the film has evolved from understanding why voters vote the way they do in my community to also exploring Asian American identity and the characters' immigration stories and how their immigration background and how their own identity shape the way they vote.
Right. And that's something that really leaked out when I watched the film actually during the HIF Summerfest. And the word that comes to mind that leaps out the most when watching this film is that it's complex, right? And there are often times that political sentiments are reduced down to ethnic, national, or other sociological categories. But instead, as you just mentioned, each perspective has its own context. Each voting decision has its own history. What would be a more precise way in your mind to rationalize a political perspective, to, in other words, try to understand it better?
Yeah. So I don't. So as a filmmaker, I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about rationalize the political perspective. I did look up data while doing research for the film, and there are data from Pew Research Center and AAPI data. For example, I looked up the exit survey for 2016 that 1/3 of Chinese Americans voted for Trump. And I was curious, within those 1/3 of Chinese Americans, how many percentage were first generation immigrants and how many of them were Chinese Americans who are born and grew up here. But unfortunately, that data isn't available. So I also looked at voter turnout, and API Vote also has state fact sheets for API voters in all the states. So these data really help me to understand the larger context of where Asian American voters are, who they are. Having that understanding is really helpful. But for me as a filmmaker, I think with this documentary, I want to actually humanize political perspective through character-driven individual stories, and to show the power and diversity of AAPI voters on screen. So not necessary to rationalize a political perspective, which data and data does that really well. But with a film, I really want to humanize political perspectives, and also challenge existing assumptions of how and why immigrants and Asian Americans vote, because I believe representation is important.
I do find it interesting in what you just said, because while you work and are trying to think through a lot of these issues as a filmmaker, the kinds of questions that you did while doing your own research and looking at the data are emblematic of people who are seeking context. You started from a point of inquiry, and I will say, I mean, if I had to go between looking at a research paper and a film to explore these issues, I'd personally prefer the film, but that's just my own preference, right? So my next question for you is this complicated question that I think happens across the board, and it's kind of this underlying tone in the film, that are questions of assimilation, of national allegiance, of belonging. And when it comes to people who supported the GOP and supported Trump, these kinds of questions emerge in a different way than for people who supported the Democrats and Clinton back in 2016 and beyond. And so my question is, do you think across these different understandings of politics, there might be some underlying common ideal or desire amongst at least the four subjects that you portrayed in this film?
Yeah, definitely. When I started making the film, I saw the polarization, the divide on both sides. But as you see in the film, at the end of the film, as I was looking through footage and in the edit room, what emerged in terms of what they have in common is that desire to be accepted as American, and to have a sense of belonging. But that's what they share in common. So like Lance said, that he wants to tell Chinese Americans that your vote matters. And Sue identifies herself as American. And actually, she doesn't like to be identified as Chinese American or Asian American. She wants to be identified just as American. And then Jennifer says that exactly illustrates Jennifer's point, right? She says in the film that some people of color, they don't want to be reminded of their racialized status, but she doesn't believe that people look at her and think that she's white. And the central question that she poses in the film is, for Asian Americans, is do we belong? And for Kaiser, he also makes a really good point that it's important to have more diverse representation that will change values and change mindsets in this country.
That's a very eloquent way to put it. Thank you so much for that. So we are 1 week, actually, not to make this film or this video not so evergreen, but it's 1 week away from a critical election here in America. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are through your own explorations of where you think the Asian American community is generally when it comes to their perspectives in 2016 as to 2020. And more specifically, do you think the subjects of your documentary will still retain the same political allegiances? Or I don't know if you followed up with them or what have you, but do you think something has shifted in their perspective since 2016?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have been doing panel discussions for the film for a few months now, and this question actually came up quite frequently. So last week, we actually just did our very first panel with all 4 of the characters. And based on what they said at that panel, that it's only strengthened their beliefs the last 4 years. And so for 2020, they're actually voting the same way they did in 2016, but more passionate about it. And in terms of where Asian American voters are, I would definitely recommend the AAPI Data 2020 Asian American Voter Survey. They have a lot of great data in that report. And so my takeaway is that I expect to see higher turnout this year. 54% of Asian Americans in that survey said that they're more enthusiastic about 2020 elections. And in 2016, 5 million AAPI voters voted in 2016, but 2020, 11 million Asian Americans are eligible voters, and also AAPI voters are have a growing importance in many competitive states and congressional districts. So I expect to see higher voter turnout this year.
Wow. I mean, a couple of points of what you just said. One is I'm very curious as to what are the variables for why each of your subjects have strengthened in their resolve towards their political convictions from 4 years ago to now. But at the same time, also very interested in, I mean, we won't know until next week, but whether this election in particular since then has really rallied a lot of the people within the Asian American community to register, to vote, and to participate. We perceive, we hope, we think so, but it's one of those things we won't know until we know. My last question for you is, like some of the subjects in this film and many more in the community, this election, you will be a first-time voter. So as your film mentioned, and this is sort of a fact that people don't recognize a lot when it comes to the Asian American community at large, is that enfranchisement is a recent part of the history, and even then still a complicated one. The right to vote for Asian Americans is only 2 generations old. So how, I assume you've already submitted your vote. I'm not going to ask you how you voted because, that's I feel that's a little bit too far, but it might also change how people perceive your film. But, did you, I guess my first question is to make sure, did you already submit your vote early?
Well, actually, I am a registered voter in DC, but right now I'm in California. So I'm a little nervous. I'm still waiting for my absentee ballot. I actually called Board of Election last week, so to confirm that it was mailed out. So I'm hoping to get it this week, but I'm really hoping to make the deadline to send it back to DC.
This might be the most suspenseful vote that I've heard of a person who made a documentary about voting, has yet to receive their vote. And we have a week away until votes are potentially counted. I hope for nothing but the best and ensuring that you do get your vote in. And the stakes, not just for you personally, but for all Americans, are very high in participating in this election as well. But I do want to follow up, though. If and when, I'm going to say when, let's be optimistic here. When you vote, how do you think it will feel? And how do you think it generally does feel for others who are voting for the first time and being participants in the American electorate process?
Yeah, so actually for First Vote Impact campaign, we are highlighting first-time voters' story on social media. So you can follow us on First Vote Film on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you'll see those stories of first-time voters. One of my favorite stories is that this Asian American college student voted for the first time, and her parents, who are immigrants from Taiwan, also recently became citizens and casted their first ballot. So her and her entire family members, they were first-time voters. They're first-time voters this year, which is great. And yeah, I mean, I think for me that I'm very excited to be voting this year. Actually, 2016 was the first time I felt that I wish I could vote. Very similar to, regardless of where politically we are. Lance, he gave up his Chinese nationality to become American citizen because he wanted to vote in 2016, and Sue ran for office for the first time in 2016. And Kaiser moved back from Beijing, and he deliberately moved to a battleground state in 2016 because he wanted his vote to count. And Jennifer, he door knocked for the first time for 2016. So 2020, that sense of passion, that sense of urgency have only increased. And everybody is so. 66 million Americans have already voted, which is historic levels of voter turnout. So this is more important this year than ever to vote. And I hope the film will empower more voters to be civically engaged, not just this year, but beyond 2020, and make your voice heard at the ballot box, and vote early and safely. And that goes for myself. I really need to cast my vote.
I didn't want to have to say it again, but I'll be monitoring the situation closely on social media, honestly. I think it's so critical for you to go participate. But at the same time, the worst case scenario, if something doesn't happen, I really hope it doesn't. The fact that you've made this film, and this film that represents such a complicated history and paints more colors into what is already a challenging history when it comes to being American and being a part of the community. So I want to thank you so much. I mean, I've seen the film. I want to see it again. It's definitely relevant and topical. And I think we'll provide more insight into just the complicated tapestries that make up this country. So Yi-Chen, thank you so much for making this film, and also for participating in this Q&A today. And I also want to thank all of you for watching this discussion today as well. And a special mahalo to the Vilcek Foundation, all of our HIFF sponsors, our board of directors, and our HIFF Ohana members. We invite you to check out other films that are in the New Americans Perspective program. My name is Ling O. Thank you so much for watching, and mahalo.
Thank you so much, Lee.